Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're seeing this. This is Dee with INFP-A Insights. And today we have for a follow-up interview from the typing session, we have Jack came over to our house today. So hi, Jack.
Hi, everyone.
And so if you haven't seen the first video, I'll just let you know the end result, which was Jack. I asked Jack to type me, and because there's been confusion, as those of you who've follow my channel, and he typed me as Socionics INFP, which is an IEI. I'm learning, and so we're going to learn about what that is and how I feel about it and what it pertains to Socionics. It's most of us are in the MBTI world. So welcome, Jack. It's your turn.
Thank you for the welcome, Dee. I
Yes.
greatly appreciate it. We went through the process which I use on my channel for working out socionics types. Came to the socionics INFP, as you said. There are some differences. There's always going to be some differences between the MBTI and socionics. The main thing is, although on the surface it looks like the same four letters, the cognitive functions are actually very different. Instead of introverted feeling supported by extroverted intuition, it's introverted intuition supported by extroverted feeling. Now, people may wonder, okay, aren't those going to be some major discrepancies? Surely mean completely different things. Well, this is the thing. When you define things differently between two systems, that can often lead to surprisingly different results. And from talking to you over the course of that hour, it seemed to me very clear that in terms of the values of your type, and in sociology we talk about values alongside strengths, not something we talked about in MBTI, the idea of values. The values lined up to what we call the beta types. The beta types are the ones with introverted intuition and extroverted feeling in their sort of valued stack. It would be what's in the stack from a Myers-Briggs perspective. But also valuing of extroverted sensing and introverted thinking. And yeah, that seemed to be the best explainer of the various information you provided, your history going back, and decisions you're making in your life today. But yeah, I was wondering, when you had a look, say, at the type, at some descriptions, did that make sense to you, Dee?
It makes sense to me, and I've done a lot of thinking because I told people on my channel I ended up having a headache because all this information was just came in a big blob,
Yeah.
and it took several days for it to break off into bits and pieces, like the Big Bang Theory, and just kind of this big piece here, and what am I going to do with it, and it just kind of dissects it out, categorizes it out. So yeah, what I thought about, and I did pick up on that Socionics and MBTI, which I will say I know about the same in each one because I'm really not an MBTI person. I just happen to be and typed an INFP, and I went with that. And everybody who knows me knows that I'm more of a holistic kind of person. But I did pick up on that. It seems like the definitions of the functions were different. And
Yes.
what I had been thinking was FI. Your explanation of NI, it was actually NI that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I had been thinking it was FI, for an example.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been doing it a whole lot more than I had thought. And I had not realized that I really hadn't thought of my life as being a vision. I knew that socionics INFPs were visionaries, um, but I didn't see myself as one until you kind of brought that out. And I got to thinking, I replayed. I replayed the interview, and then I went through and did nothing but the chat, the chat was very interesting because I did not have that on during the interview, and did that by itself, and just replaying it in my head, just thinking of, yeah, it did make a lot of sense that I was having a vision, a long-term vision. I do look to the future. I do have goals. It's kind of like goal oriented. I know I'm goal oriented, but they were like short-term goals. Like I'm a football fan, so let's go 10 yards and carry the ball. Let's don't do a touchdown. Let's go 10 yards
Yeah,
here, 10 yards there, all throughout my life. Yeah. So it did make sense.
that's good. Do you have I guess, is there anything you'd like to learn more about regarding socionics, regarding the INFP and socionics type? Anything that you feel you'd like to know, or maybe your viewers would like to know?
Yeah. I made a list, which if I make a list, I would say I'd like to show people because I don't write anything down. And just basically an
Yeah.
INFP type person, we're not going to write anything down. And I made a list and trying to make sense of it all. So I I think I did say what I was going to say. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention that
Mm.
came out that I did learn about the INFP is, and you call it it's called the mystic,
Mm.
that we know things, how things are going to end, the end result.
Yes.
And I have always, well, I'm going to go back to metaphysics a little bit. And I am a claircognizant, which is, for somebody who doesn't know, is that you know things, but you don't know how you know them.
Mm.
And I don't foretell the future, but I can tell a lot of times how things are going to end. Um, that happened to me during my therapy work, and when I was an intern, that happened one time with a child custody case. And I
Mm.
told my supervisor, I said, this child's going to end up, after a couple of meetings, this
Yeah.
child's going to end up with the grandmother. And she said, no, you don't do that. You keep an open mind. So later on, I finished my internship, and about a year later, I saw my supervisor again. I said, by the way, where did that child end up? The child ended up exactly where the first time I talked to the family, I knew the
Yeah.
child was going to end up
Mm.
at custody. So we kind of know, we
Mm.
can kind of see, not into the future, but there's just a knowing without knowing how we know,
I call it the just knowing
but just knowing.
effect. It is something which the beta NFs, the ENFJ and INFP of socionics, they both really, that is their main source of knowledge. It is the just knowing. It is
Uh-huh.
so different in
Yeah.
nature to how we in our society today tend to think of what knowledge is, which is very much the empirical science, not really knowing anything, just sort of putting things through trial and error and seeing what has worked and recording what has worked versus what has not worked. And
Right.
the beta NF approach just cuts straight through that, I just know. Don't tell me how I know. There's no evidence, there's no facts, there's no
Right.
statistics or sense impressions. Something from my soul just tells me this is what's going to happen.
Right.
And you say no, we keep an open mind.
Right.
The INFP, it does. This is the thing. This is where I challenge the idea that the INFP has any in that second position. No, they don't keep an open mind. If you know,
You
why
know.
have an open mind? You know.
Right. And that carried through, even in school, and later with advanced math. I said I can't. In the interview, I said I couldn't do math. I don't like math. Science I can't do. But
Yeah.
the advanced math is like statistics, for example, in graduate school. One the thing I knew the answer, but I couldn't get it to work right. And so I
Mhm.
actually wrote a paragraph to the professor how I knew that I knew the answer, and give me part credit. And then which she did not. And then when my oldest daughter was in algebra and she got stuck, and she said, "Mom, help me with the homework." And I just went and I said, "Well, the answer is this." And she said, "Yeah, but we have to work it." And I said, "I have no idea."
Yes. Yes. It, that's in a way that's sort of the blind spots of the INFP. They can see the what. They can see the why. I think we talked about last time. They see the why, but
Right.
they have a blind spot when it comes to the how, which is
Uh-huh.
why it leads to these weird situations where you know the answers, but you can't tell people how you got
Oh,
there, what the process or methodology
right.
is. Yeah.
It's just there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I stay away from the type functions in life where you have to give the process.
Yeah.
It's just as long as you reach the goal, that's me. As long as you get to the goal, the answer, and I do like the process, but it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong as long as the end result turns out okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
One question I did have, and I'll say the beef. It's not a beef, and that's not a. And I'm not trying to give anybody a hard time. I'm trying to learn. It's Quadra, and I only did for the INFP because I can. That's all I can digest right now. But we're in the beta.
Yeah.
Quadra. Now, I will still have to say, and I say this kind of jokingly, but kind of serious. I'm a little offended to be in that Quadra.
Oh.
Because all my buddies who are EIIs and IEEs are in the Delta.
Yeah.
Why can't I be down there? Why is a Gandhi and a Mother Teresa up here with dictators and Hitler and genocidists? I work against that. That's not who I am. And I'm like, I don't want to be up here. Not up in, I don't want to be in the beta quadrant.
Sure. The beta quadra is the main thing which all these people have in common. What does Gandhi have in common with Hitler? That is the question that needs to be asked. What does Martin Luther King have with Chairman Mao or Pol Pot or Stalin or Putin or, Mussolini? And what they all have in common is that desire to really impact upon the world, to shake and change the world in some sort of meaningful, impactful way. Socionics doesn't say anything to good or evil.
Okay.
It simply is about what is the driver motivation, and if the motivation is to change the world, that's about having a big impact, regardless whether it is good or evil. Which is why the greatest people of humanity and the worst people of humanity are to be found together in beta. When you look at the deltas, their values are not about changing and impacting upon the world. Their values is about how can I grow and develop and learn and be the best person I can be? How can I go off, learn from the world, have all sorts of experiences, hear different perspectives, and just be a student of the world? The desire there for change is entirely an internal change as opposed to an external change. And so if we look at people who really impact on history, we're far less likely to find deltas. They can be found, but they're usually because they find themselves put in the situation where they're going to make an impact on society. If you look at, say, a Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, he was kind of put in that situation. He wasn't someone who said, I'm going to set out to conquer and be an emperor. He was the most responsible person in the orbit of the previous emperor. And vice versa, that previous emperor, who was also a delta, was the most responsible person in the orbit of the previous person, and so trusted him to basically be the CEO of the greatest empire at the time. But the point is, what did he do? He did things dutifully, responsibly. He didn't change the mold of what it meant to be an emperor, but he wrote some great books on his personal meditations, which are a source of great wisdom for Stoics even now. But that's the thing. Deltas aren't going to really look to make the impact. They're not interested in making that impact. They're just interested in being a good person. At the end of the day, it's what they feel to be a good person, which isn't necessarily a heroic person. It's usually helping someone in a far more local and day-to-day way. So yeah, usually when betas and deltas interact, it's not about good and evil. It's about, are you exciting or are you sort of boring, but sort of sensible in being boring? And the betas are never boring, regardless of whether it's evil or good. That they always have a sense of I'm fighting against the wrongs of life, the injustices of life. I'm holding that to rights, and I want systemic change. And yeah, that's the reason why. And I guess it's the idea here that betas often take issue with finding that they're put next to these very, very evil and nasty people. Absolutely. But then that's kind of the price that comes from being the quadra that accomplishes the great changes in the world.
Oh, I get it. Well, that makes sense because I've been spending like a couple of weeks here just walking around thinking I don't want to be there. Why am I? You know, and it is kind of interesting because we're in a way close together as far as the types go. And for those who don't know, when I was talking by the other types, they are with the MBTI. We were talking about the MBTI, INFP, and the ENFP were the two that I had mentioned in the Delta.
Oh, so yeah, well, it would
the,
yeah, the MBTI, INFj, and the INFP-A.
From the MBTI, because a lot of people watching their mindset's going to be MBTI. They're not going to know what I call alphabet soup, and I don't go into a lot of the cognitive functions on my channel just because it's confusing and gives people headaches. So what I was talking about of the deltas, we were talking about that I hang around here on the internet would be the ENFPs and the INFPs from the MBTI.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And why I'm thrown up here with all these dictators and anarchists, and I want to go and throw them out the window, you know. But that is true. I will say, just give another story, that I left law school. I started out in law school because I wanted to change. Interestingly enough, I wanted to change the world.
Yeah.
So I went into law school, stayed one semester, found out you don't change the world in law. You can work around it a little ways, but the law is the law. You have to work within the boundaries of that structure. Yeah. So I left and went into social work, who is one of our roles. We have a lot of roles, but one of our roles in social work is change agent. And then when I saw that we are called to be activists, so I said, "Oh, this is interesting."
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
So goodbye law. I'm going into this. So yeah. So I appreciate you explaining that. Yeah. So I would agree with that a lot of the people in the deltas they have to be pushed. I said that to somebody not long ago. It's like the mama bird. You got to push you out of the nest and get you out there. And instead of just saying if you see an injustice, just go ahead about that. So yeah, it makes sense. I appreciate you I had written that. I don't know if that can show up anywhere, but the beta is my biggest. Is it? Probably doesn't.
You got the background blur, so it's gonna blur unless it thinks it's a face. Yeah, because it doesn't think it's a face, it's gonna blur unless you turn off the background blur on your camera settings.
Well, anyway, beta is taking up 3 lines on my.
Yeah.
to be sure, I mentioned this.
Yeah.
That I don't get sidetracked. So let's see. Anybody have any questions? That the chat's going really well.
Is it good?
It's going really well. I don't know what they're saying. They're talking about gaslighting me, which I don't feel like I'm being gaslit by anybody. Let's see.
Amber Rose is saying she doesn't relate to Beta. Rye gaslight her.
Yeah.
I see. Well, you said, and briefly to say if that's not the case, you said that you don't agree with Beta because, well, no, you said your issue with Beta was that you had lots of nasty people in there.
Right.
And I said, yeah, but you also don't have just nasty people there. You have the sort of very heroic figures like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and keep in mind, Gandhi, he was a nationalist. He had an ideology. In fact, his I think actually at one point his wife died because he followed an ideology of not using penicillin. So, right. You know, you see the same kind of patterns of this is my belief structure and this is what I want to enact upon the world in some way. Mm-hmm. So it's, you know, he wasn't a pragmatic figure. If you look at philosophers like Nietzsche, also very much a Beta philosopher, he frowned upon the pragmatic ones who don't really stand for anything, who don't show any honor or higher set of belief. They're just sort of managing with the situation in front of them and not really taking a stand and everything. He held that in contempt. So that would be more what we'd see with the deltas, the sort of not really taking a stand for things, instead doing what is more practical day to day, not following their passion. I think there's a guy called Mike Rowe. He gave his whole, he's an LSE or ESTJ. He gave his whole thing about don't follow your passion, explore new ways of work, which you might find that you like, but actually is practical to do. And all about the process and working about the good process and putting your best foot forward in doing things well. That would be the delta. I didn't say, but Gandhi was a Gandhi is pretty much a beta. He's an INFP. I actually wrote an article on Gandhi. It's on my blog, actually. If you'd like to read it, it goes into quite a lot of detail in terms of how he created social change. He did it in a very sort of non-direct, pacifistic way. But the idea was for him that if he allowed the British to use violence against him, that would essentially inspire sympathy in people and therefore lead to that sort of social change. And it did. It was a very sort of indirect way of sort of using the aggression of others against him to create great change, which I think is a very good example of what an INFP can do. It's very indirect. It requires a strategic understanding of how people are going to react to what you're going to say. And by doing certain small symbolic acts like collecting the salt, which was illegal as far as the British Empire was concerned, that would provoke a response. And then they acted, and then he refused to do any violence. And then that created the sort of the public will for the change, and eventually the creation of an Indian nation state. And we're talking about Martin Luther King is not beta. I'd say, yeah.
Oh, where was that?
Martin Luther King is, I'd say, is a very good example of a beta ENFJ. This is someone who was able to inspire and lead a whole movement around the civil rights. He balanced a desire to be more sort of hardliner revolutionary with the sort of slightly more open-minded compromising side, which ENFJs can do more than other betas because they got stronger extroverted intuition and weaker introverted thinking. But yeah, he was definitely someone who saw and dedicated his life to sort of broader social change, to bring about of social justice. This is very much fitting into the pattern of a beta type. I'd also point to Nelson Mandela, again, another beta figure who's seen as quite heroic, who was quite aggressively revolutionary in his earlier years and was put in prison and then was able to transform himself into this more sort of very wise, very sort of compassionate figure, which, again, was very inspiring to a lot of people. You can also look at betas who didn't get to live as long and also became iconic, such as JFK. We can look at even in music, not always in politics. You can look in, say, the arts. You've got characters like David Bowie and, again, an ENFJ, very good at reinventing themselves, becoming new sorts of people. If you look at an INFP, though, we have, Kate Bush is a good example there, a very successful musician with the ability of drawing upon quite deep, quite mystical themes and then finding ways of representing that in her work, like the one where she basically reenacts Wuthering Heights and the ghost of Kathy visiting Heathcliff. So it's not just political, but it's about the ability to inspire and elicit changes and sometimes quite raw and quite passionate emotions and get you to feel slightly troubled in your thinking, which unlocks a change in people's mindsets. This is what beta is very much about. But there happens to be that there's an inordinate number of betas also who are world leaders in politics, because as well as change through the more artistic medium or being a sort of social justice figure, they can also be attracted to the hierarchies of power. And so you get the more sort of beta STs, extroverted sensing and introverted thinking. You can think of figures such as, you can think of someone like a Donald Trump figure. You can see but
No,
also,
let's don't go there.
but also Joe Biden, I'd say, is
Right.
another beta. Barack Obama was a beta. But they all pretty much are. Vladimir Putin. If you look at Emmanuel Macron, another one. There are lots of them because, again, if you accept the idea that the drive to external world change, right, and don't try to put some kind of morality or ideology on that,
Right.
it has the rough and it has the smooth. The key thing is that beta is never boring. It is always exciting, and it has the great heroes and the great madmen of history in that, and also the great mystics and the great lawgivers. It's all of it, and as a result, they are front and center in our public consciousness because they strive to be the figures of our public consciousness. Whereas deltas don't particularly care about being remembered after they're gone. As far as they're concerned, it's did I just live a life in which I did good things to help other people immediately around me? I'm not looking to change anything. I'm not looking to have a revolution. Betas, they want the revolution.
Right. Exactly. That reminded me of one creator I saw was online friend, an INFP, MBTI INFP just did a video and was talking about being remembered, uh, and he couldn't fathom being in somebody's brain after he was gone. And it was interesting to me, timely that it just came up because I had thought that we synced a whole lot, but in that regard, that's different, and I can see that follows what you're saying, that the deltas don't really care about legacies and about the change and all of that. They are, I don't know, they're here and they do what they need to do. And like my friend was saying, um, why would it hadn't occurred to him why he would have a legacy, people would remember him after he was gone, and that would take up somebody else's brain cells or something to that effect.
So,
Whereas to me,
yeah,
I've always wanted some kind of legacy. I thought that's what everybody did. You leave something behind, you know.
yes, and it goes. If you look at the more extroverted betas, it really is it's taken to quite an extreme level where almost they don't think they really exist unless it is in the public consciousness, unless people they have a reputation, and they are their reputation. For the beta
Right.
introverts like yourself, it's more about finding that clear truth under all the noise. That is the signal. That is the direction of their lives. But yeah, it is again. Legacy is really what it's about. And for deltas, no, it's about it being in a constant journey and process of improvement and self-development and growth and flourishing. There are lots of deltas in the typology community. I think if you look at, say, personality hacker, I think there's a very delta focus there, where it's less even about the typology. It's more about how can we have conversations to learn something that we can use to apply to our lives in some sort of practical way that's helpful. And
Right.
yeah.
So I'm going to add. Well, I'm just going to put in here just what Heather said, that it makes sense what you're saying, that you're anticipating other people's next moves. I guess with having to do with, and I would say Heather has, and I've been communicating in my videos that she has been torn, like I have, between INFP and INFJ and MBTI. You know?
Yeah.
So she's another one that this is helping her a whole lot, just sort of FYI. So I give her a shout out here. So she's understanding a lot more too today.
That's good. I know Heather. We've had conversations as well,
Yeah.
which has been delightful. Actually, she sent me a lovely message the other day.
Yeah. So I did want to say hello to her. I am reading as we go along. So um, oh no, we can't do this question. A random question, D. What were you like as a teenager? I was a hell raiser. It's my channel, I can say that.
Mm.
And we've gone over what YouTube won't get on me for saying that. Yeah, I was I was an anti everything. I was a product of the '60s. So that's all you need to say. That's just, I was a teenager in the late '60s. It was the height of the Vietnam War. Um, you think we have problems now? It was. I was very depressed. I think I was anorexic. I'm just going to give descriptions so you can just fill in the blanks. It was. I will tell you a turning point for me is I was always very, and I still am. I'm always very patriotic, and I always believed in the government, and I always believed because I grew up in the '50s, and the '50s have been here in America have been said to be have been almost perfect. And I know there weren't women's rights and all that kind of and racial inequality. I know all that, but there really wasn't any war. There wasn't all this other stuff, and you could own a house. You could do this, that, and the other. A lot of people, but yeah. So I went from that to an idealization type of world to we had the Vietnam War, and what turned my head was when I was in college. A friend of mine came to me in the library because I worked there and I lived there almost in the library, reading about everything I could. And he came and he says, our National Guard killed 4 students. And I said, no, they didn't. The government wouldn't do that. And what happened, that was in Ohio, and they had protesters and they were shot and they were killed. And so that just turned me to the point of I totally was in shock for a long time. And then I went totally hippie, totally this, and totally opted out of society. I didn't want to have anything to do with any of it. I protested the war by writing to my congressman. I got petitions up. We sent petitions to Congress. I wasn't in the streets. I'm an introvert. I'm not the street kind of person. But I did mobilize people. Wanted it to end. And so, yeah, I wouldn't do anything in school. I quit trying. I didn't study anymore. I can make good grades without studying. I was bored, but I didn't study anymore, didn't do what anybody in authority told me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's basically my teenage years. Yes, I was just, but ironically, when I got out of school, I did not want to go to college. I wanted to go into the military. And I wanted to go to Vietnam, and I didn't realize women weren't allowed in war zones. But then I turned it all around. I guess that was anger. Knew a lot of friends who got shot. Everybody went over just about, but killed or shot. So just a hard time. A lot of turbulent time. And we didn't believe that we were going to get out of it. I remember my high school reunion, my high school graduation. We wanted a reunion after 5 years and not 10 years because we didn't think we would be alive after 5 years. The men were, but they were all in Vietnam. So that was my teenage years. Yeah. That got me to be where I am today, I guess. So I hope that answered that question. That is a whole book and a half. Whole book and a half. So when people think, I would just like to say this. This is my world changing lecture sentence. When people think of the '60s and they think of Woodstock and they think of all the nice music and I was love and free sex, and I wasn't involved in all that, but that's what you think of when you think of the '60s, how wonderful it was and how, nobody wanted to work, and we were just, the boomers were just all, stoned and orgies and all this stuff. That really isn't true.
Mhm.
Um, but what they don't tell, and what the American history doesn't tell, it was a very hard time because of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
The country was torn apart because of the Vietnam War. It was a very hard time to be a teenager. Yeah.
Makes
So
a lot
I
of sense.
think that's how boomers can relate to the Gen Zs. We do have a lot in common in that respect. We're going through a lot of the same things.
Mm. I wonder if boomers were sort of more similar-ish maybe to millennials. I've just been thinking about
Oh,
certainly this idea that the boomers were the rebellious cohort. They were the ones who were progressive for their time, and now that we're meeting sort of a new wave of sort of social progressivism, and now people look at the boomers like, oh, you're not with it, but really they were the ones bringing in sort of a more sort of liberal values from the more sort of slightly more authoritarian, socially conservative values of which were at their peak in the 50s, and certainly in the period leading up to in the Cold War. Um, yeah, I would say it was very much a beta aligned generation. It was definitely one where it was taking the world to rights. It was seeing an injustice, and the hippie movement. Yeah,
yeah.
people think of that side, but really it was a political movement. It was a sense of these are values we are now bringing to confront the values of the earlier half of the 20th century, and those are the values which I think then took hold for the second half of the 20th century, certainly going into the earlier part of this 21st century.
Right.
I just may I just also answer the comment by
Yes.
Ambrose about it being not fair and very dishonest to speak about Martin Luther King and other historical figures
Oh,
as if I know them. And she's right. I don't know these people. I never met them personally. Martin Luther King passed from this world, unfortunately, before I was born. But what I will say is that when it comes to public figures, people with a great deal of literature on them, whether it is their own writings, their speeches, documentaries about them, books about them, these people have so much information about them in the public sphere that you can find out more than enough, I would say, to form a good understanding what their type is going to be. More so than many people you would meet in person, because the information is out there. The different opinions and the interpretations have been sort of weighed up against each other, and a lot of the work really has been done for you. You just need to get to that information and learn about it so that you can then make an informed decision as regards their type. Some people in sort of ancient history, perhaps not enough records to really make anything, concrete on their type. But some like Martin Luther King, very, very well documented and understandably well documented. And same thing I'd say for Mahatma Gandhi and the other people I've talked about in this past session.
yeah. Well, that's a good point, and glad you brought it up. We don't know everything about everybody, and even people that we see day to day. We're not going to know all about them. We just know what they show us, and that's true of the writings too. But you can gather enough information, just like with genealogy. Um, I was into that back about the 70s,
Mm.
and then you can take facts and you can surmise by putting patterns together, um,
Mm.
and reading their own words. I think reading their own words. Um, and one time with Martin Luther King, hearing his speeches, I'm fortunate enough to have heard him speak, not in person,
Mm.
but I lived during a time when I was around when he got murdered. I was
Mm.
around when Bobby Kennedy was murdered. I was around when JFK was murdered. Um, I've, I've lived a lot,
Yeah.
Uh, we haven't had an easy life. The boomers haven't had an easy life, and the '60s weren't that great. But I would think, just from what I saw and saw his speeches on TV, um, that he would be more of a I don't know what Quadra, and I don't know Socionics that well, but in the pacifistic kind, world changing, pacifistic kind of mentality. Yeah.
Yes. And I think also part of that was that he was Christian, and he was carrying forward those values as opposed to, say, more fascistic values or communistic values, which often require a removal of Christianity from the picture. So
Right.
there's a thing. Beta is many-sided. Depending on what the ideology is, it can look very, very different. It's just finding what they all have in common, which is the world changing as opposed to the self growth.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Kit, I'm going to bring everybody in here. Not a question, but the 60s in the USA was a period of society redefining itself. Yeah. And I don't know exactly what of and what for, and we're getting into big time abstract things, but I do know the 50s that was McCarthyism, and then now that was a shift in the 60s. I don't know what I would think about that. What do you think about that, Jack, about it redefining itself with the...
I think the 60s and the boomers, I think, who drove us changes from the 60s, but the figures who weren't boomers, who were older, but still were in that period, it was the rising of the modern liberal values we see in America today and much around the world. That was when it shifted. The time before that, the time of sort of the 30s going up to sort of the 40s was a time where new ideologies were really being tested out and taken to their logical extremes. Those ideologies were communism, fascism, and liberalism. And liberalism won in that period. But then it took a while for that to then really ascend and actually become and reach its own logical conclusion, starting, I think, with the 60s and sort of the sort of social revolutions then. And we're now seeing, I think, the sort of the furthest limits of liberalism in the modern day, where many of the assumptions we have are now been sort of overturned. So, yeah, I think there is, I think it did definitely, that first major triumph internal to the US, I think was in the 60s.
Yes, that definitely started to shift.
Yeah.
I only gonna say, like I said, just living through it, because the 50s were just seemed so... Well, I was a child, so that was a time of innocence.
Yes.
I read somewhere one time somebody called that decade the decade of kind of innocence, and then it just kind of changed, and now we're all in the big mug now. But well, we go from we go from the start. This is how my channel goes, Jack. We just ramble on everything. We start with one little thing, which was I forgot what it was. How I like the typology. Now we're into MLK in the 60s and now everything else.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate you explaining the beta Quadra, because that was really bothering me. But how could that happen? And I don't want to be affiliated.
Yeah.
Particularly me, because I am against everything that I see on TV that this looks like it represents.
Yeah. And a lot of a lot of beaters of different camps really do not want to be affiliated with each other, because the whole point is, the nature of beta is to be affiliated with people in your camp who believe the things you believe, and not that lot who believe those horrible, terrible things over there. And but that's exactly, that is what we see in the beta quadra. It's the deltas who are like, oh, I know they may be from that camp, but I'd love to hear their perspective and get to live life in their shoes a bit. And yes, so in a way, a delta probably would mind less than a beta would, but that's the point. The betas, they do see things through what camp they belong to, rather than sort of cutting through to sort of, you know, the various nuances of each individual's experience, which then takes away all the signal as far as the beta is concerned, just adds a load of noise to the picture once again.
Right.
I also wonder if the sort of we're perhaps entering into another era now where we're going to see more betas. We saw them. I said I think the betas, I think, were around in the 30s, moving into the 40s. I think they were showing in the 60s as well. I think we may see a similar time when we're seeing sort of clashes of ideologies again, and a sense of now we need to redefine ourselves again. And yeah, I think that the liberal period has started to sort of, it's starting to get a bit creaky and leaky, and I'm wondering if we may see a rise more of a sort of the populism, which we're seeing perhaps more so it's starting more in Europe, but we saw it as well in the US. It'll be interesting to see what changes are going to happen, how disruptive they're going to be. But I think we're in for another interesting time.
Yeah, I saw something the other day where I only saw it one time, and I don't know where, because I get my news from everywhere and nowhere. I try not to watch it, but I do see the headlines. But it's talking about we're now moving into more of a centralist stance, which was interesting to me. That's all I heard. I didn't see the rest of it. It was kind of, I think it was on TV. I just got the tail end. But it's the two extremes are getting too extreme, and now we're going to be pulled more into a centralist view.
But what's gonna pull people into a centralist view? Because well, we'll do it.
I didn't hear that part. I don't know, but I think well, from my standpoint, it could be because we as people are tired of extremism.
Yeah.
And we're tired. I don't mean that we hate it or love it or whatever, think about it, but we're getting just tired of the same old from both ends, to whether and nothing's getting done. And like over here in the States and Congress in the House, we had a cat fight with two congresswomen this week. And it's just nothing's getting done by being on the two polar ends.
Yeah.
So that's my point of view. You have to be more central to get something done.
I think that's wise. I don't think that necessarily what's going to happen. I'm wondering if what's going to stop the extremists from being extreme, from continuing to double down in their respective ideologies and blaming everything on the other side. The ability of centrists to draw the extremes in, I think, is pretty weak once it gets to the level loggerheads we're seeing. I wouldn't be surprised if we're heading towards, well, I've heard it said quite a bit online by people who make quite rather strong arguments that we may be heading towards some kind of second American Civil War. It'll be interesting to see what does happen. But I wouldn't put it past us, because at the end of the day, we're still humans. We like to think we live in a society past those sorts of things. But I think, what has really changed in the human condition to say that we are past having another civil war? The hatred is there between groups. The breakdown of the usual sort of social norms between those people who run our country. I say our country, when in your case, your country, but we're seeing elements of it also in the UK as well. It's not as extreme over here, I would say. And
in other parts of the world, the Middle East is starting to get into that too. Yeah.
Yeah. That one, that's
the sticky wicket. I don't get into that.
Yeah, no, yeah. That's a difficult one. Look, the Middle East has always been an area of beta. That is a very much a beta area, the Middle East. it is the clash of ideologies, and that's not really going to change anytime soon.
No.
America, on the other hand, goes through sort of gone through more shifts and changes because it hasn't
Right.
typically been a beta society. It started off as a very gamma society, where the nature of the American Revolution, as opposed to the French Revolution, which was very much a beta revolution, the American Revolution was actually a gamma revolution.
Oh.
And what I mean by that is it's not about social change, it's about independence.
Right.
And you cannot tax us without representing us.
Right.
We have control over our own fate and our own destiny. And that kind of independence revolution led to a sort of a society which is very much about, you're out, you got to rely on yourself. There's plenty of opportunity if you work hard and you get it. And that kind of value system carried America through for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Then we got to the Civil War, the first Civil War, where there was an ideological clash. And it was, although other things it's pinned on a number of different factors, it doesn't change the fact that all the states that were aligned to the South were the slave-keeping states, and the states which weren't aligned were to the South were the non-slave-owning states. And it seemed to me that the way that the different economies had developed, one around sort of in industry, the other one around sort of a more agrarian culture, that the betas who sort of picked up the sort of values from England, from the English nobility, this idea of being sort of a landed gentry, having people of the lower social class working on the farm and all the rest, they very much identified the keeping of their slaves and other things as part of their sort of honor and sort of their ideology and worldview. Then you had this sort of far more Puritan streak coming from the North and the Yankees, another kind of ideology, one where they go to churches and they have an eye painted on the wall looking down on them and watching them all the time.
Right.
And these sort of ideologies, one from the sort of the English Cavaliers and the noblemen and friends of the king, but then you had the others, the Puritans, who came from the Roundheads, who sort of won the war in the English Civil War. It just played out again, and it's ideological clashes. But this is a saying. Yet both of these groups, you could say, would have been sort of led by beta figures. Not so much in the case of Abraham Lincoln. I actually say he was a Delta. Actually,
right.
He wasn't out to create social change. He ended up in that position. He was more of a sort of pragmatic figure who sort of got overly involved in the different processes he was trying to run and handle things with. But yeah, I won't get to that level of complexity. I'm not going off on the tangent.
Yeah, but that's true. I think, but getting back to the question, and then it's about time to go anyway. But how are you going to get rid of the ends and get to a centrist type thing? I'm thinking people are thinking they're just going to vote them out, but they don't understand that the places where they're from, their constituents think like they do. I mean, I mean, you can't vote unless everybody moves from somewhere else. So they're just going to wean themselves out, and some will. I mean, that's what happens. They'll find another way of doing their cause. In another venue. They'll go to another venue. Yeah, I have my thoughts, but I'll think. I will say, and then I'll leave it at that. If anybody asks another question, talking about visionary, and this is what we like to do here, the INFP. Take it out. We go on tangents, but we pull it all back around to a circle.
Yeah.
With the vision. And what we're talking about with the typology, I had just thought the other day that, I told you I'd traveled to Arizona and this, that, and the other. I already have my ticket. I have my reservations to go to Washington, D.C. on January 6th of next year.
Yeah.
For the election and see what happens. And I don't know why I'm going other than I've been guided to go. And I'm going to wait for the election. If it gets too raunchy, I won't go. But I have a need to be there.
Yeah.
Me as my person.
Yeah.
I have a need for whatever reason to just be in the city. I have my reservation. It's almost Washington D.C. is almost full already, and I've had my reservations for a year. I mean, since January, it'll be a year. And so yeah, I'm going to be there this time, and I may be in my hotel room. That's fine. But yeah, so that's another vision thing I have, that I need to go for whatever reason. So, oh right, let's see. Illusion just came in here.
Yeah.
Let's see. I can't read it. I'm gonna put it all up here. If you've been extra entertaining, if you hit it, conceal that of your name to see how he typed you without that. Great conversation. Yeah, you know what? That is a great point. I debated. I have been looking. I have been looking for someone to type me.
Yeah.
For like 2 years. I mean, looking in my head, not looking.
Yeah.
In my head, and I thought, well, how do I want to do this? But with me, and it would be great to not have the INFP in there, perfect. But for me, it would be deceptive. I came to the point that that's my value. The value part came to play, that I don't think it would be fair, because I was just going to go as a person and just not say I have a channel, not say how old I am, not say anything, just go as a person. But to me, who I am, I could not have done that. I could not have done that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to put it out there that I do have a channel, and I am 70-something years old, if that matters in the typology world. And if you're interested, and it took a while to pick out who I wanted to do. And this is what we ended up, not what we ended up with. I'm thankful to Jack for doing that, because I did pick you out of everybody I looked at along, and I've been thinking about it for 2 years. So finally did it, and this is how I would have done that. I was confident enough, and I will say I was confident enough, and had seen some of Jack's work, that I was confident enough that, you could be objective as possible in the whole process. And you're not an MBTI person, so it wouldn't matter that much anyway.
There is no perfect type crossover, so I was going to have to say something controversial at some point. But even that, like I've had people who've told me they are X type in MBTI, and usually I get a sort of perverse pleasure in telling them they're a very different type in Socionics. I like that. I wouldn't shy away from that. But yeah, I think, yeah, I think certainly you have typed yourself as close to what would make sense in the MBTI system, and so the crossover was not that, didn't result in that much of a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, our time is up. This has been great conversation. I appreciate you coming over to our channel and talking with us today, Jack.
Thank you. Thank you, Dee. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we'll end. And as I say, everybody, this is going to be on playback. Most people will see this on playback. This is the way my channel works. And until next time, I hope everybody stays safe.
Stay safe, everyone.